I will speak on the historiography of religious interactions in medieval and early modern India. The lecture will be divided into 5 parts. In the first part, we shall begin with questions of historiography and the challenges to the writing of history. In the second section, we shall discuss Sufism and the making of Islam in India. The third segment will focus on Bhakti traditions and the problem of religious identities and contestations around them. In the fourth part, we shall analyze the divergent political practices and rule under Akbar and Aurangzeb in sort of a comparative frame. The concluding section will examine how historians are dealing with current issues in terms of both academic research and responses and interventions in the public domain, and in the process, pushing the frontiers of research. So let me begin with the first part on the challenges to the writing of history. History is often used as a weapon in ideological struggles and identity contestations. This is especially true in critical issues involving politics of religion and the writing of history around that politics. In agenda-driven histories deployed in public debates, the question of truth is set aside in favor of requirements of the time and politics of the time. In such debates, history is not so much about the evidence and facts regarding what exactly happened in the past, as we are supposed to be doing as historians, but it is a matter of opinion and perspective, and therefore debates and quarrels. This is the case both in vernacular or popular histories circulated in the public domain, in public, and in the assumptions of professional academic history also in our institutions. Even though the primary functions of both are different in terms of vernacular histories of the public domain on the one hand and our professional academic history on the other, both of them converge in terms of offering differing vantage points in popular politics and struggles. Our history is used in that politics. Within academia, religion and political culture profoundly impact the writing of history, leading to arguments, quarrels, and formation of groups or schools of historiography, as we call them. The history of history writing in India in the past couple of centuries has witnessed assumptions and formulations advanced from a number of standpoints, different schools of historiography. For instance, in colonial historiography, some strands of which have continued even till recent decades, as the Cambridge School or Commonwealth scholarship, colonialism was projected as something that was for the benefit of the colonized people. Yes, they would have remained savage barbarians with no or little sense of history. James Mill said in the early 19th century, Indians have no sense of history. As in the 11th century, Alberoni said, Hindus have no sense of history. These false assertions are in conformity with the view that conquerors write history on the body of those they seek to dominate or decimate, countering the colonial position and showing that the conquered people eventually survive to tell their own story also. Various strands of secular nationalist historiography have blamed the British colonial policies of 19th and first half of 20th centuries for the mess the British left behind here in India. Hindu-Muslim conflict, caste system, economic degradation, and a host of other issues and problems are shown as constructed under the British rule. Construction of communalism in India, for instance. This set of scholarship also plays down somewhat the significance of religion in public life. Whereas we know religion remains very, very important in public life, as in the private lives of people. Even though it provides fodder for communal hatred and abuse, much of our contestations and politics revolve around these issues of hate and abuse around questions of religion on sectarian communal lines. And this is very aptly characterized by one of our leading historians here in Delhi, Professor Niladri Bhattacharya, as predicament of secular history, where he is reviewing the works of such stalwarts as Romila Thapar, Satish Chandra, and Muzaffar Alam, among others. On the other hand, so that was secular history, internal critique of secular history. On the other hand, Hindu communal propaganda as history continues to take ugly turns. Even serious historians belonging to the rightist camp, few as they are, come up with outlandish propositions. The best example that comes to mind is projection of medieval India as a dark age in the historiography, in the right-wing historiography. Medieval India was a dark age because there was no electricity in medieval India, was the assertion. And this was, the argument is that this was because bigoted Muslim rulers followed Islam, which was against science. And this kind of argument goes well with the wrong crowd, which is so very righteous in its self-image. By contrast, and yet supplementing communal Hindu narratives, is an equally bizarre Muslim separatist scholarship which glorifies the Islamic past in the subcontinent. It traces separate Hindu-Muslim identities back to Arab conquests of seen early in the 8th century. Also important historical figures such as Sant Kabir and Mughal Emperor Akbar are treated as agents of Hinduism who sought to destroy the cause of Islam in the medieval period. This is Ayaz Qureshi, who taught here in Delhi at St. Stephen's College previously, before moving to Pakistan. And such arguments and people still thrive in that location. Thus, what we are generally confronted with is political propaganda peddled as history. Not so much academic history in terms of knowledge production, but political propaganda in the service of the politics of the time, giving examples from the past and such examples which feeds in their arguments, sometimes distorting the evidence from the past. Now, does it mean history does it mean history writing cannot be free from ideological control? Happily, more empirically sensitive and theoretically sophisticated researches in recent times have led to fresh thinking. And that's why we see that the scholarship is changing continuously and responding to the challenges. Now, this new scholarship is sought to be blocked or resisted both by secularists and right-wing political propagandists, but scholarship has continued to grow in institutions both within India and abroad, working on Indian history or South Asian history, within the larger fields of social sciences and humanities. New research takes head-on communally sensitive issues such as temple desecration and the question of conversion of non-Muslims to Islam. The nature of the state is being discussed with reference to rulers concerned for law and justice for all, peace and tranquility, welfare mechanism, as well as looking for India's own political theory based on secular principles, as in concerns of political theorists such as Rajiv Bhargav. New studies on Akbar and Aurangzeb analyze broad-based political framework, theory, and policies, which are contrasted with narrow and exclusive political strategies which abuse religion for the purpose. Historical examples and philosophical insights on governing principles are used to assert that when religious beliefs run into problems with secular principles of the state in multicultural or multi-religious contexts, as in India, the secular principles and progressive laws must be privileged. And this is being shown by analytical philosopher Aqil Bilgrami, among other scholars of political science and history, and as also theoreticians. Further questions are being raised about the need to reconsider the conventional periodization of Indian history in ancient, medieval, and modern, with specific languages of sources to be utilized, Sanskrit, Persian, and English respectively. Do you want to do medieval India? Do you know Persian? For ancient India, do you know Sanskrit? Will be the traditional argument. The older and simpler formulations are being broken through richer source base now, including judicious use of literature in the writing of history. And this is also creating, new possibilities of thinking in terms of, distinctions regarding periodization. It's not merely about Hindu, Muslim, or British period, or ancient medieval or modern period, but also there is an early medieval, which is a long early medieval. Now there's also an early modern, 16th, 17th, 18th century worldwide is early modern, and therefore Indian history in connection with the larger global history processes, etc. of the 16th, 17th, 18th century. India is part of that process, and therefore early modern India of the 16th, 17th, 18th century. As also 13th, 14th, 15th century is properly medieval, and from around 6th, 7th century to the 12th century is the early medieval. So we are now thinking about also in terms of new namings and new clusters of centuries according to the characteristics of those centuries and historical processes in that period. And new source base such as the literature, as I mentioned earlier, the Sufi Premakhyan, for instance, poetry of love, of which Malik Muhammad Jaisi's Padmavat is one of the best examples, are now being studied by historians and literary scholars, with a lot of interest. However, there are perhaps still not in a position, historians are not in a position to handle the muddle created in the name of artistic freedom or in the service of communal politics, as we have witnessed in recent years in the wake of the making of the movie Padmavat. Scholars of literature and history need to talk here, and they can't remain cocooned in their little boxes. Previously, literature people thought historians are doing some boring things, and they're claiming they are doing some scientific research. And historians thought literature people literature is all about imaginative writings of fictional kind, and the two cannot talk. But now things are improving. In popular devotional fields, the shared and disputed terrains of Sufi Bhakti complex reveal fault lines fraught with possibilities for shrewd cultural negotiations and brutal political violence. Two examples which may be given here are of Yogi Gorakhnath, Gorakhnath of the 11th century, and his favorable attitude towards Sufis who were perceived as belonging to the jati or caste of Allah, and of Kabir's aggressive support to the newly found fad for vegetarianism in medieval India, which is a big issue, beef eating for 500 years now, to which I will briefly come back in the latter part of my lecture. Thus, history is a hot topic in popular politics of the public domain. Medieval Indian history is an especially contested field. Pressures from different kinds of ideological positions and politics of identities of various kinds together put serious constraints on the practice and writing of history. As indicated above, despite the challenges, scholarship has continued to grow. Current historiographical thrusts illustrate how a whole range of themes and issues are dealt with by professional historians from a variety of perspectives with reference to sources and evidence. Critical issues relating to the complex interactions between religion and political culture are no longer being swept under the carpet. Those issues are now being taken head on. I begin now the second part of my lecture. In this part of the lecture on historiography of religious interactions in medieval and early modern India, we shall focus on Sufism and the making of Islam in India. Ideology-driven research agenda, left or right of the center, and divergent Hindu-Muslim interpretations of India's medieval past have less to do with any serious attempt at understanding how the past might have been like, and more of an exercise in abusing the past for the politics in the present, which is continuously disturbing us in terms of creating hurdles in the writing of history. The desperation to show the past in a particular manner in popular histories of the public domain is understandable, for it serves the purpose of identity politics and aspirations of people, whether ethnic or religious or whatever kinds of identities. But professional historians falling in the same trap is against the protocol of their discipline, where historians are supposed to maintain critical historical distance, etc., and objectivity in terms of credibility. The primary purpose of which is to contribute to knowledge production. We are not here for politics. We are here for teaching and research, and therefore contributing to knowledge production, mainly for experts in the field, but also for some dissemination in public, because our research must go also into the public domain to educate the public, which often does not happen. Consider the example of conversion and Islamization in medieval India. Politically motivated popular Hindu and Muslim interpretations can be easily dismissed as biased and unverifiable propositions. On the other hand, unfortunately, serious historians have tried to hush up this communally sensitive topic instead of applying rigorous historical methods to analyze and interpret whatever little evidence available and come to some conclusions, even if that conclusion or conclusions may not be consistent with one's preferred political position in, say, a context like the current, volatile political aggression. For instance, it is the responsibility of the historians to examine and illustrate how such a vast Muslim population has come to happen in the Indian subcontinent, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh taken together. These are mainly local converts to Islam, and not immigrants from Central Asia, Iran, and the Arab world. Despite claims from sections of Muslims of their being of Turkish, Iranian, and Arab descent, their DNA test might reveal to be a far-fetched genealogical claim as part of a process of Islamization, which is perhaps still continuing. Well-to-do Ashraf Muslims claim they are descendants of Prophet or descendants of the companions of the Prophet, etc., or they came from Iran, Central Asia, etc. But actually, they are Indian people, converts to Islam over a long period as part of the process of acculturation, accretion into Islam over 700-year period or more. This process, beginning from around the 13th century, when various Muslim sultanates emerged, needs to be analyzed and explained. But even the best of the historians have been in a denial mode that Muslims are not foreign immigrants, that sword was not used by rulers to convert people, that sections of Muslim religious leaders, ulama, would have wanted to use political power for proselytization, but did not get that support. And that it would be erroneous to say that Sufis were responsible for conversion, for they always supposedly worked for communal harmony and tolerance. Which means that none of these causes were responsible for the making of Islam in India. And thus the question remains that if neither rulers nor ulama and not even Sufis were responsible for conversion and Islamization, how do we explain the making of Islam and such a huge population of Muslims in large parts of the subcontinent? Not only in mainland Hindustan, but also in Punjab, Bengal, Deccan, and coastal India. Huge population. There has to be some accounting for that process of social change and religious change, leading to the making of these Indian Muslim communities of different kinds. My own understanding, developed over the past couple of decades, is that Sufis have shown the way, taking Islam culturally and peacefully to most remote corners of erstwhile Sultanate and Mughal rule. Being part of the political process, yet maintaining critical distance from politics, which often involved violence, especially in conquest and control of areas offering resistance. Sufi traditions have been claiming and showing, at least since mid 14th century, Sufi tazkiras, hagiographies, etc., Amir Furt, Siyarul Aulia, for instance, that Islam has spread in localities wherever Sufis of various spiritual genealogies were settling down, carving their own sacred geographies with large numbers of followers with no demand or pressure to formally convert to Islam. Over time, these communities of people have undergone multifaceted processes of religious change, and many formally adopting Islam without abandoning cultural practices of localities they inhabited. Thus, for example, Punjabi Muslims would remain culturally Punjabis, as would be Bengali Muslims, Bengalis, or Dakhni Muslims, Dakhni, with various aspects of their cultures shared with fellow Punjabis and Bengalis and people of the Deccan region who subscribe to some other religious worldview and rituals abhorred by Islamists, reformists, revivalists, etc. Self-styled reformists have risen from time to time to put pressure on these Muslim communities, telling them that they were not Muslim enough and that all the innovations in their religious rituals, as in Sufi shrines, have to be purged for them to be proper Muslim of the Arabic kind or Arab kind. They also identified non-Muslims as hostile kafirs or infidels who were to be eliminated in the most violent manner possible, or they should be converted to Islam, or they should be forced to migrate to wherever they can go. Such reformist streaks are now being organized in terror groups of the kind the world is confronted with, ISIS and all that, rupturing older traditions and bringing such a bad name to Islam, even if the ideal for them is an understanding of 7th century Arabia, ideologically developed since the 18th century. Reformist revivalist movements since the 18th century are focusing on how 7th century Arabia is the ideal for Muslims everywhere, and that can be, strived for and restored in some ways. At the root of the struggle is political control for forcibly implementing a particular kind of Arabic Islam, a flawed and wicked strategy, creating so much difficulty wherever it can. In such situations, historians need to stand up, authoritatively confront, and educate the public on the complexities involved in these issues, rather than attempting to sanitize or exploit them in conformity with their ideological positions which they wish to uphold. Mention may be made here of some important and interesting works by scholars such as Richard Eaton, Collins, Simon Digby earlier, and more recently Scott Kugel. Together, these and several other scholars have pushed the boundaries of research on history of Sufism in India. History of Sufism, the study of the history of Sufism in India is no longer caught in 1950s and 60s. Instead, researchers in the last 30-40 years have pushed the boundaries in such a way that interesting new works are continuously showing up to show Sufis were very, very important in the political and cultural history of medieval India, and their roles have continued in subsequent centuries up to the present. And in this context, the question of conversion, Islamization, etc., and the acceptance of Islam at a certain level of belonging, Sufi traditions and practices are important.